In this video, we're going to talk about habit formation. Hey, I'm Kristi. Thank you so much for joining me. In this video, let's talk about habit formation. So what do we know about habits? Habits are a creation of what we have been exposed to, what we've soaked up, what we've seen other people do, and we just kind of tend to mimic those behaviors sometimes. So habits can also be created or removed or changed with a series of goals. So I think sometimes we forget that a series of goals will turn something into a habit. So we tend to have these goals listed out there, but do we even really acknowledge that once that goal has been met or is in momentum to being accomplished, that now it could become a habit? So I think there's a lot of things that we don't really give the attention to when we are talking or thinking about habit formation. So let me give you an example of one that really stood out to me. I was recently watching a rerun of Everybody Loves Raymond. And all of these years, we saw the big brother, Robert, every time he ate, he would hit his eating utensil to his chin, and then the spoon or the fork would go into his mouth. And I always wondered where he came up with this really, like, he's an unusual fellow, right? Where he came up with this quirk or a habit. So it wasn't until seasons in to the show that they actually started to explain in a story, and it was so heartbreaking. So Robert was an only child, right? And then comes along Raymond, and so Marie was giving all of her attention to Raymond. And so when she was trying to get him to eat, she would do choo-choo sounds or the airplane coming into his mouth, those kinds of things, right? And so Robert's over here kind of sitting by himself, and he's now responsible for feeding himself, and he wanted that kind of attention too from his mom. It's so heartbreaking when I heard this in this episode. It really made my heart yearn for Robert. So anyway, as a 3-year-old, he created this habit and he's lived into it his entire life. He's well into his 40s. He's now married, and he has this habit of touching his chin before the food goes into his mouth. So what kind of habits are showing up in our lives? I know I've got plenty of bad ones, and I also know that in order to get rid of a bad habit, we have to actually replace it with something good. If we don't actually fill that space, the likelihood of us getting rid of that bad habit, the odds are against us. So let's dive into some of those missing elements and why we make it so difficult to have these goals hit and habits formed. So when we're talking about goal creation and habit formation, we tend to take on too much, too large, too soon of a time period. And then we're actually setting ourselves up for failure. So those habits show up because of external triggers, right? And then something happens in our world. I'll give you an example. I used to smoke cigarettes from 13 to 30. That's right. At age 13, I started smoking cigarettes. And once I was well into my teen years and it really became a habit, things would trigger in my life, and my go-to response was to smoke a cigarette. So if I got stressed, for an example, right, my go-to response was to go and light up a cigarette. And so that external created this internal need, and then the reward was that fulfillment of the nicotine. It calmed my body, it soothed me, it gave me that instant reward. And that's why bad habits are so hard to break, because we have an instant reward, where the good habits that we're trying to bring into our lives tend to have a reward that is really far out. Let me give you an example. Let's say you want to lose 25 pounds. So what's difficult about this is that usually those rewards are pretty far off. So if we change our eating habits, it's not like instantly you see it. You might feel a little bit better if you're eating less carbs and less processed foods and those kinds of things, but there's a really good likelihood that you're still craving something. I know when I don't have my carb fix, I'm not really full at the end of that bowl of salad. So I'm trying to do the right thing over here, and then I find myself eating and munching and snacking an hour later because I didn't get my fulfillment out of what I was going for in my meal. So think about New Year's resolutions. How many times have you said, I'm going to do this in this new year? And you probably wound up with a list of 3, 4, 5 different things. And then on week 2 in your new year, you have failed probably across the board. At least that's been my experience. And even if I just fail at 1 or 2, sometimes I tend to quit all of it, right? Like I feel like a failure, I can't do this. That's what next year's resolution is for. And so when that happens, I just go back into my regular way of being, the habits that I had created. So a lot of times we don't understand that we A, need to replace one habit with another one, and B, we need to have a different matrix, if you will, for those goals that we've set for ourselves to go and hit these new habits. We need to have more of an instant reward to be able to satisfy us and keep us going towards hitting that goal and making it a new habit. So habits are broken into 3 parts. The first is the trigger or the cue. I gave you an example about how I smoke. So something happens, right? Like there's this trigger that happens and makes me want that cigarette. So we have this habit loop. It's triggered, it's started, it's now in motion. It starts us into our just regular way of being, and it's usually because of an external event, and it triggers something internally inside of us, and then boom, we go to our go-to behavior. And in this example, me lighting up a cigarette. And then number 2 is the action. It's either a good action or it's a bad action. And it's something that we have adopted and we've used as just our go-to behavior, or it's something that right now you are needing to drop because it's a bad habit in your life. But either way, there's an action that takes place because of that trigger, and it's something that we've adopted or we're now focused on dropping. And that third part of that habit is the reward. And that's what makes the bad habits kind of stick around, is because we have that instant gratification, that instant reward. So let's think about somebody who uses drugs. It's instant. Alcohol might take a couple of drinks, but it's more or less instant. Shopping therapy, smoking cigarettes. So those are a couple of examples of bad behaviors that are in our world that give us instant reward. So now we're trying to change that habit, right? So instead of drinking, maybe I'm going to work out. But that working out doesn't necessarily give us that instant reward. For some people, that serotonin is flowing and they're feeling really good at the end of the workout. And then for other people, they go and stand in front of the mirror and say, look, I've been at this for a couple of weeks and I don't see one lick of difference in my body. And it's because it could take months worth to show up on your body, because it's likely taken years worth of those habits that we've formed to have our body show up the way that they do. And so most people fail because we fail to reward ourselves for the good habits that we're trying to put into our lives. Think about it. Those positive things like I'm going to meditate, I'm going to eat healthy, I'm going to exercise. Those things take a long time to show up those great benefits in our lives. And then we kind of get distracted or we get discouraged and those kinds of things. And so we tend to stop following through. And now we don't have a new habit created. We actually have a goal that we failed to meet. So what can we do? We've got to find motivation to keep us going. Let me give you an example. Let's say you want to work out, but you don't have the motivation to make it happen. But let's say you love dark chocolate. If at the end of every workout you rewarded yourself with dark chocolate, that would be a really great motivator, right? But then you can create that habit that you only get the dark chocolate at the end of your workout. Now, please hear me. I am not talking about a king-size Reese's peanut butter cup treat, right? I'm not talking about a Snickers bar. I am simply talking about a little piece of healthy dark chocolate. So what are some cues that you can stage around you to help you get into action? Let's get an example going about exercising first thing in the morning. If it's difficult for you to get out of bed, maybe one of those things that you can have is an automatic timer on your coffee maker. And so that way you can wake up to the sweet aroma of coffee beans brewing for you. And maybe that will help get you out of bed and get you motivated. So be creative here, have fun, because it only benefits you. And then number 2, what barriers can you remove out of your life in order to make it easier to sustain this new goal that will become a habit? So for instance, let's talk about working out, right? Maybe you go to the gym first thing in the morning and you bring all of your stuff with you, so you get changed and cleaned up and ready to go straight from work there, so you don't have to wind up taking 2 showers in the day. It also helps streamline your morning a little bit. You've got everything packed and ready to go. Make sure your gym is close by. You know, if you had to drive 30 minutes across town, you may not be as excited to get there. So having some of those barriers removed to make it easy. As an example, I wanted to start eating healthier for my family, and one of those barriers was leaving a long day of work and then going to the grocery store. So I had to think about what I wanted to have, and then I had to go shopping for it. I had to come home, I had to prepare it, and then make the food, and then clean up and it was just such a mess. So instead of doing that, we're doing the grocery delivery system. So weeks in advance, I pick out our recipes so we know what's for dinner. I hate that question, what's for dinner? So we know what's for dinner. It gets delivered to us one day a week, and boom, all of our ingredients are there, and I don't have to go to the grocery store after a long day of work just so I can have dinner. Because what was happening was my default was we would throw in a frozen pizza or we would order takeout, and that isn't healthy for us. So in order to change, we removed some barriers, and it's actually made it very, very streamlined for us to be able to keep moving forward towards this goal that will become a habit of eating healthy. And then number 3, how do you keep encouraging and rewarding yourself for these actions? So really get creative here. How do you keep that going? What can you implement into your life so that you have that reward at the end of doing the thing that you're trying to implement as a new habit? So most people wind up really tripping over themselves because we've set unrealistic and really high goals for ourselves. So if we can't actually meet that goal to become a habit, we're actually hurting our self-esteem. If you miss a goal big time, don't you feel kind of like crappy on the other side of that? Like, there I am again, being a failure. I don't know about you, but sometimes those voices speak a lot louder than like, atta girl, look at you, you're doing great, keep it up. So in order to remove those kinds of negative voices, we've got to actually change our expectations and set realistic goals. So if your goal is to run a marathon in 3 months, but you haven't been off the couch to work out and even step on your stepper machine in the last year, probably unrealistic. If your goal is to lose 50 pounds this month and you're not going in for some surgery to cut it out of your body, it might be unrealistic. And then if you're looking to quit smoking, right, and you don't have support and help, you might wind up trying again. I know I quit probably 25 times before it actually stuck. But what was a game changer for me was that I learned that I had to replace that bad habit with a good habit. And then after that good habit, I learned to reward myself, to have that instant gratification. And you guys, for 6 months, it was the hardest part of my life, was the 6 months of post quitting smoking. So let's be realistic and create some safe and progressive ways to get you there. So I have 5 ideas I'd like to share with you now to help your habits stick. So number 1, make it so small you can't fail. I know that sounds like we might be aiming low, but it's actually aiming well, okay? So let's say your goal is to write a book. And maybe you start off with a goal of writing 1 page a day. And if we break it out to something that we can actually incorporate into our lives, we have a much better chance of turning that goal actually into a habit, and then we can build from there. Number 2 is consider the compound effect, right? If your goal is to lose weight, you didn't put on that weight overnight, so you're not going to shed it overnight either. So please show grace and patience to yourself and allow 2 to 3 months before anything shows up as positive results. Number 3, break big habits down into small ones. So if your goal is to work out 60 minutes a day, perhaps you break that out into 15-minute increments, right? First thing in the morning, on your lunch break, right after work, before you go to bed. Maybe you want to start doing 100 push-ups. Don't start with 100 push-ups at one time. You might really hurt your body there. So maybe you break it out to where you're doing 20 push-ups a day, 5 times a day, and then you'll actually hit your goal. So breaking it out into measurable and smaller chunks can help you hit success. Number 4, never fail twice. Here's what's important about that. You might stay up late on Monday night watching football. You may not have slept well. You may have had a thing you had to do and it just interfered, and now Tuesday morning you are exhausted and you can't get out of bed. Show yourself grace. but don't let it happen again. So on Wednesday morning, you make sure your butt, your hiney is out of bed and you're doing what you said you were going to do. Don't let yourself down that way. Don't let your goals down that way. But if you get into the habit of allowing it to, get in the habit. If you allow yourself that second time, you're actually allowing the habit of letting yourself off without any kind of repercussions. So again, we've got to make sure that you're focused on that why, that end goal, but don't let it happen twice. Don't fail twice. We can fail once and show grace and be kind to ourselves, but don't let it happen again. And then number 5, be kind to yourself and find a sustainable pace. We want it to be healthy. We want it to feel right. We want it to create goodness in your life. But you guys, exceptional lives are not created overnight. It takes time, it takes a plan, it takes patience. And I know you want an exceptional life for you. I want an exceptional life for you. And in order to create an exceptional life, we've got to show patience. We've got to show kindness to ourselves, but we also have to allow that time for that habit to really set in. So I hope these 5 tips give you some really great insight on how we can actually create a habit that sticks. And now you see the intertwining between goals and how those goals, once they're attained, they become true, real habits that we can live into for the rest of our lives. I know I've got to set realistic goals. I've got to have patience and kindness to myself, and I've got to not let myself fail twice, right? But have those motivations, those rewards, that instant reward so that we keep on going. Because once you reward that mind, it likes it. It keeps on going. It wants more of that. So shower yourself with reward after you accomplish your goals of hitting those new healthy habits that you want to incorporate in your life. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. I'd love to continue the journey with you. And in the meantime, stay well, my friends.